Donald Trump has sent troops onto the streets of America again. Here in Washington, D.C., you can see the National Guard lined up around the city centre, ready to tackle what he says is a dangerous crime wave. Is he allowed to do this? Will he do this in other cities? Where might it end? Welcome to America.
Welcome to America. Hello. It's Sarah here at the ground zero of American politics in Washington, D.C. and it's Justin. And one is still the worldwide headquarters of America's. They've been booted out of the main studio, Sarah. So I don't know whether there's some kind of coup going on. Well, there's lots of talk of coups in Washington, D.C. But the most important one, the America's one, is a sort of silent coup. But anyway, we'll cope. Well, it's very, very visible what's happening here. I have to say it's the opposite of a silent coup because there are National Guard troops already on the streets of Washington. 800 National Guard officers have been sent here. And you can see them up and down the mall, which I know. You know, Justin, is that huge ceremonial strip through the center of D.C., where many of the memorials and tourist sites are, very visibly. There are big Humvees and people in uniform patrolling, along with all sorts of other law enforcement officers, including from the Drug Enforcement Administration. It is very obvious what's happening on the streets. Yeah, because when you say Humvees, two things occur to me from what you just said. Number one, the National Mall isn't exactly the crime center of the United States, is it? I mean, I've done loads of pieces to camera there, as you do now, and you never feel that your stuff's going to be nicked. So let's just hold that thought for a second about what they're actually doing. Number two, I suppose we should say a bit about the National Guard. Because what you've just brought to our attention is that this is quite a military-looking outfit, isn't it? These aren't pretend soldiers. It really does make an impression. And they have proper kit. That's because they're real soldiers. It's a reserve unit of the Army, kept ready to be deployed in big emergencies. More often, that's been for natural disasters, where they can help with hurricanes, flooding, and other damage. Occasionally, they've been deployed to handle riots and civil disorder. They haven't been sent in by a U.S. president other than Donald Trump since 1992. During the riots in Los Angeles, which was a very serious, violent situation, completely different from what's happening in Washington right now. And yes, it does feel quite performative. Justin, I think that's your point, that the mall might not be where you're likely to get stabbed or carjacked. But it is where most visitors to Washington go. And Donald Trump says he wants to reassure them that it's safe to come and visit their nation's capital. Still, one feels that these guardsmen are mostly there to be seen. Do we know what their rules of engagement are? It's never been entirely clear to me when the National Guard is deployed. As they were during those riots, you mentioned how much it escalates a situation. Do they have greater freedom, to put it bluntly, to shoot people than the police? Or do they not have that freedom? In fact, they cannot arrest people except in very special circumstances. And no one is saying that's what will happen in Washington, D.C. They are there to back up and support police operations, according to officials. Now, they do make a very visible presence, and of course they are heavily armed for crowd control. That's useful, but nobody is saying that's the situation on the streets of Washington right now. They can detain people until local law enforcement arrives to arrest them. The real question is, who's actually in charge here? Is it still the DC mayor and the local police force? Or has Donald Trump, by federalizing policing in Washington and sending in the Guard, made himself the ultimate decision maker? Asterisk, that's extremely unclear. It's been asked many times at the White House and in the mayor's press conferences, but the answers remain opaque. Asterisk, no. The Guard is not there to take over the role of the police. They are essentially supposed to be there to back them up. Asterisk, so, do you want to talk a bit about what the mayor's making of it all? Because there's obviously a Democratic mayor of Washington, D.C., as there always is, Muriel Bowser, who has, behind the scenes, been pretty punchy. Asterisk, she's told her community, according to the New York Times, we should protect our city, protect our autonomy, protect our home rule, get to the other side of this guy. Make sure we elect a Democratic House of Representatives so that we have a backstop to what she called an authoritarian push. Asterisk, but it's really telling, isn't it, Sarah, that in front of the camera she hasn't been in much of a condemnatory mood, and that, I suppose, brings you to the difficulty Democrats have even when every sinew of your body tells you this is a bit silly, performative at best, and when you could argue crime is actually down in most big American cities. Arguing against something that appears to be about suppressing crime is a delicate thing to do. Asterisk, yeah, it's a trap that, if Donald Trump thought Democrats were going to walk straight into, they've managed not to yet. Asterisk, but here's the problem. It's inarguable. Just in the statistics are there that crime, certainly in Washington, is at a 30-year low. But that doesn't mean it's non-existent. There are stabbings and carjackings, and these have happened to staffers working for the White House and to people who work in Congress. You can't go around telling people the streets are safe if that's not their personal experience and not how they feel when they're out on the streets of Washington or any other big U.S. city. Asterisk, it's almost exactly like what was happening this time last year, when we were talking constantly about the economy, about inflation, and about how voters were complaining that grocery prices were going up and up. Joe Biden, the then president, was trying to tell them inflation is coming down. Don't worry about it, I've got the economy under control. Asterisk, the statistics he cited were true, but it wasn't how people felt, and it's just really bad politics to go out there and tell people what they're feeling is wrong. Asterisk, so Democrats need to be careful not to go around saying, hey, crime isn't a problem, and Donald Trump is just using this made-up excuse to send forces onto the streets. Asterisk, but there's a completely different argument, as you know well, Justin, about the American president sending essentially the armed forces, not local police, into states or, in this case, the District of Columbia, taking charge of crime and law enforcement. That's a very political act. Asterisk, I'm fascinated by how you oppose it, or whether you even get sucked into opposing it at all, because that point you just made was really underlined by, of all people, Joe Scarborough. Asterisk, Joe Scarborough, the morning host on MSNBC, the left-leaning equivalent of Fox News, said this about journalists expressing their views in private to him. Asterisk, you know, I actually heard from a reporter when this happened, saying, well, you know, if he doesn't overreach, this is actually a good thing for quality of life, etc., etc. Because DC right now, I had this happen to my family, I had that happen, they go down the list, and then I saw him tweet something completely different. Asterisk, so yes, there has been a problem in DC. It's not as bad as it was 2 or 3 years ago, but it's still not as safe as it should be for the nation's capital. Not as safe as Manhattan. Asterisk. I thought that was quite striking, but what he could also have said is that, however safe or unsafe it feels in DC. Sarah, it's actually a lot safer per capita if you look at serious crime per capita than many other cities. Donald Trump has mentioned, compare DC with New York or with other cities. Trump often talks about Oakland in California, Chicago, all Democratic-controlled cities. There are also plenty of Republican-controlled cities where the per capita crime rate is still higher. Yes, that's absolutely true, and some of it, of course, depends on the type of crime and therefore who experiences it, because we know worldwide that the worst and least well-off neighborhoods generally have the highest crime rates. That's also true in this very segregated city of Washington, where in Southeast, for example, there's a relatively high murder rate, which is nothing like what you find in Northwest Washington where I live, where the streets do feel pretty safe, but when it's downtown areas where people are being stabbed, mugged, or carjacked, that's a different story. You're much less likely to be the victim of a drive-by shooting. But that doesn't mean being carjacked at gunpoint isn't a terrifying experience. It's something people absolutely do not want to think about when they're walking out of a restaurant, cinema, or theater to go home. So, this is a real concern Donald Trump is tapping into here. But the question is, why? Because it's not the job of the President of the United States to beef up law enforcement, even in the capital city where he lives. Traditionally, this is up to the mayor of a city or the state government. Instinctively, most Americans don't want to see armed forces on the streets dealing with fellow Americans, even those who aren't obeying the law. That's just not how the country is policed. And that's why there's a sense that this is part of some kind of authoritarian creep, that Donald Trump is looking for any excuse to send troops onto the streets, first in Los Angeles, which he did back in June during riots over immigration raids, and now in DC, and possibly next into other Democratic-led cities to pick fights with governors and mayors, like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois if he targets Chicago, for example. That authoritarian perception of the president's actions is alarming many Democrats, civil liberties advocates, and ordinary citizens alike. And of course, the question of why he's doing it is both interesting and relevant. In fact, we've had a question about it from Matt and Derby. Hi everyone. Lately, I've been getting flashbacks to Trump's first term when it seemed like every day brought some unexpected, headline-grabbing decision. For example, announcing he's deploying the National Guard to DC. My question is, are these major moves part of a planned agenda, or is Trump improvising as he goes? And along with that, who's actually shaping these announcements behind the scenes? Who's whispering in Trump's ear this time around? Who's whispering in his ear? Well, he has people close to him, like his Chief of Staff, Susie Willey, and Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, who I think are very much on the same page with this kind of action. Is it planned? I'd say it's instinctive, but within the framework of a broader strategy and overarching idea in which Trump and his administration can seize on news events and moments, then shape them to fit the larger political picture they want to project. This is what a lot of people were worried about even before he got back into the White House, that he would want to use the Army and the National Guard to crack down on protests. He seemed really frustrated that he wasn't able to crack down harder on Black Lives Matter protests in his first term. And once it becomes more normal for the president to send troops onto the streets, where does that end? If you're particularly worried about Donald Trump's ultimate agenda, You can find plenty of people saying he's softening us up for the moment, when he uses the army on the streets to suppress the next election to stop people from voting in areas he doesn't want them to take control of polling stations, and to bend the election in his favor, even if that's not what he's doing. It's still against long-standing norms for a president to send troops into American streets. That's why people are worried. And that raises the question, if you're a Democrat and you truly believe this is a rehearsal for overturning democracy, do you stay quiet to avoid the trap we've been talking about? Or do you speak out and risk being pulled into his narrative? I heard Paul Begala, the veteran Democratic consultant from the Clinton era, hugely influential in the party, because he's both able and loquacious, say exactly this. He absolutely condemns Trump and can't stand him, but he warned Democrats, "It's a trap, don't get involved in talking about this." But if Democrats truly believe Trump is trying to overturn democracy, they may feel they have no real choice but to engage. I also wonder whether this is even about crime at all, or whether the crime in question is Jeffrey Epstein's. Maybe this is just another way for Trump to change the subject, something he's very skilled at. And that's true, the Epstein scandal hasn't gone away, and there are still plenty of unanswered questions. But here we are, Sarah, you and I, not talking about it. We've fallen into the trap. It's true. Donald Trump is brilliant at changing the subject, seizing the agenda, and molding news coverage to what he wants it to be. By the end of this week, the focus will have shifted again, perhaps to the summit in Alaska. But dismissing this simply as a diversion may overlook the bigger picture. Even if you don't believe this is part of a plan to overturn democracy by using the U.S. military, it's clearly part of a narrative he wants to push, that crime is out of control in America, particularly in Democrat-run states and cities, where violent thugs are terrorizing law-abiding citizens, and that only Donald Trump can fix it. The facts that some Republican-led states and cities have higher crime rates are irrelevant to that story. What matters is being seen to confront Democratic governors sending forces into their cities, and then telling supporters, "I solved this enormous problem through strong-arm tactics. I'm the only one who can do it." That phrase, defund the police, still casts a long shadow. I've heard Democratic operatives call it one of the worst, most self-defeating slogans in American political history. Originally, it had a second part, defund the police, but spend that money on preventative measures, mental health support, community programs, anti-crime initiatives. Not all Democrats used it, but during the George Floyd protests, some did, and it's come back to haunt them. There's now a national perception, fair or not, that Democrats in certain cities don't take crime seriously. And in places like parts of Chicago, where there's a lot of weekend gun violence, that perception has weight politically. It's similar to the immigration debate. Democrats want to say, "We care about law and order as much as anyone," but they struggle to convince voters. As you say, Justin, the argument around defunding the police began as a conversation about police brutality, especially the killing of black men, but that focus has all but disappeared. Now, under Trump, the Justice Department is pushing for the most lenient sentences possible when police officers are charged with excessive violence, often against ethnic minorities. So, in just a few years, we've gone from a public debate about police overreach to a vision of the most authoritarian policing imaginable. And as always in America, the law sits in the background. All of this is open to legal challenge. In fact, There's already a case in Los Angeles about Trump's earlier deployment of the National Guard there. It may hinge on whether he breached the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits using the military, including the National Guard, for civilian law enforcement, unless authorized by Congress or in cases of insurrection or rebellion. It would be considered hugely controversial in the UK to send troops out to do the job of the police. And the same applies here. That's why the deployment in LA is being challenged. Opponents argue the emergency Trump declared didn't meet the Act's requirements.